So the topic we're going to discuss now is LaTeX on the go, and that's about using LaTeX on mobile devices and so forth. And it's Tim who raised this topic, and I'll pass over to him, and he can explain why it's important to him.
Thank you, Jonathan. LaTeX works a treat on high-powered laptops and big desktop devices, but so much of the time now, certainly when we come out of lockdown anyway, we work on the move. We work with smaller gadgets, and the ability to be productive with LaTeX on the go, I think is extremely useful for a lot of people. It's actually the ability to be productive whilst stuck in the tube or on the train or on an airplane or wherever is a great use of time. And I find the current portable versions on iPads to be frankly a bit clunky, a bit unreliable, and because they've been bent and adapted to work. Even daft things like one of the ones I was using doesn't work with a particular font that I quite like to use. And it's just clunkiness. Something's clearly been squashed into a corner. So from a software engineering point of view, it just seems we could do rather better than that. So I'm very curious to see what else others are doing to produce accessible software on the go that can open the availability of tech up to a wider audience. Over.
Tim, Jim, I think you should be on next, and do the mini LaTeX project.
Okay, great. So I'm going to share my screen and give a, oops, let's see. The host has disabled screen sharing. I can't hear you, Jonathan.
You're on mute, Jonathan.
Okay, we'll take that bit out. Can you manage without screen sharing? And
I can talk about it, but it'll lose a lot of the benefit. But I'll say a few words about it nonetheless. So mini LaTeX, first of all, it's an experimental project. I'm looking for people who are willing to experiment with it and tell me about what works for them, what doesn't work for them. The point is to have a LaTeX application that works in the browser. It does. I'm sorry, was there a question? Okay. A little bit of feedback, I guess. So the nice thing about mini LaTeX is that as you type, it is typeset instantaneously. So you type and what you type shows up essentially immediately. Errors appear in line in the rendered text, so you don't have to hunt through a log to figure out what's wrong. Sorry, there's a little bit of ambient noise because I'm in New York and you hear the subway going by. If you want to try this out, the application can be found at minilatex.lamdera.app. I will put it in the chat in a moment. The application is written in a functional language called Elm, and it has the advantage that it's a language for writing web applications, and it also has a very good library for writing parsers, which is what you need to do LaTeX in the browser. So the strategy I take is very different from Overleaf's. Overleaf runs standard LaTeX on the back end on the server and pushes what it renders to the front end. My approach is to render everything on the client, which makes it very responsive. The downside is that every feature that I want to expose in LaTeX, I have to engineer on my own, like an equation environment, a theorem environment, et cetera, et cetera. So it will never be the jack of all trades that Overleaf is. On the other hand, it's very convenient for doing things like classroom lecture notes. I've written some quite substantial multi-part documents using mini LaTeX. And anyway, that's sort of a synopsis of it. It would be best to have a little online demo, but we won't be able to do that right now. So I'll put the URL for it in the chat.
It seems to me that this is a setting where less is more in the smaller your LaTeX system, the less features it has, the more you can do with it on the go.
Right.
If you try and reproduce a big system on a small device, it doesn't work. And the other thing I'm thinking is that if you can break your document down into small pieces, paragraphs or something, and you can edit it a paragraph at a time, then that's a lot easier to do on the go on small devices and low powered devices than trying to deal with a big document that's got several hundred pages. So being able to narrow the part of the document that you're working on seems quite important.
Yeah, if you look, for example, at my quantum field theory notes on mini-LaTeX, it's a long document, but it's organized in sections. Each section is not very long. So that helps both in editing the document, and of course, it's much faster to render a small document than it is a large document. I should say that there are various convenient features, one of which is you can export any mini-LaTeX document, either single or multi-part, to a standard LaTeX document. So things are not held prisoner by the system.
I wonder if Sanchit would like to say something about his use of the org mode in Emacs, because that's a sort of outliner, as I understand it, and that allows you to break a document down into small pieces, or at least pretend it's made out of small pieces. I wonder if that's something you'd like to add to this conversation, Sanchit. Yes, no? Okay, we don't seem to have Sanchit at the moment.
Jonathan, perhaps somebody else can comment on org mode. I've heard of it, but I'm not familiar with what it can do.
I've used org mode substantially. I use it as a daily driver to track to-dos and things like that. It's more of a to-do task manager document, but it has expanded a lot, and now in Emacs you can even write large documents, put notes that you will do this and do that, and you can of course use markdown type of syntax and then export it to LaTeX or anything, mostly with Pandoc and other document parsing systems. One of the issues with using a cut down version of LaTeX is, for interested users, they quickly want to go to the more powerful use cases. And I think those are the people who will become your next generation of committed users. And then if one software does only one part of it, and then you have to substantially change your software to get access to the full LaTeX package, might discourage adoption across multiple use cases. If I just use it for taking notes, I'll use it, but then once I move to writing a book, I'll go to probably Word because it's fully fleshed out there. In fact, I think that's one of the reasons why Office 365 hasn't taken off as well as Microsoft Word has. It's a cut down version. You can't do bibliography management and things, and so people don't use it as much. I don't see the big problem with just sending it to a server and then getting it back. In fact, just SSHing into a server, sending it there and coming back, we can do front ends on that. One area where as a beginner, sometimes it's a little problem is the commands and the macros and the environments. Emacs solves it with automating it very well. But outside Emacs, if I were to write it in a notepad, the syntax errors creep in. So that is one area where I think the constraint is it's not so much on LaTeX, it's on a nice front end which does all the cleaning up of syntax errors.
Tim, would you like to ask for more?
No, I just want to come back to what Shubo has just said, which is that the point about not having to rely on the server on the back end is that that's much happier if I'm stuck in the tube, or actually, to be honest, on half the railway lines in the UK where the mobile phone signal is vestigial at best. And if you're taking the train into London, you will frequently be sitting there watching one bar go to no, back to one, back to two, back to nothing. And if you had the ability to be independent, it'd be far more useful to someone like me. But I think about people in other parts of the world with even less access to reliable data, something which is self-contained will be potentially very useful. I'm with you, Jonathan, that less is more in that the ability to produce readable output that looks 95% the way there in little bits is actually precisely what I want to do on the move. Rather than, I'm not going to compile, a 200-page report stuck in the tube. It's all about, in mobile mode, it's about tweaking, and it's about having, recording an idea or a thought you've had in a way that you can then use afterwards without having to rewrite the thing or grab a bit of paper and write it down, which I hate, especially on the move. So I think for me, it is absolutely about the independence and the flexibility that brings.
I think it might be helpful to think of a LaTeX user with a mobile phone as a user with a disability, because they're not at their home PC with the big screen and all the power and everything else. And in that situation, they need an alternative view, an alternative format, they have alternative goals. They might even welcome the ability to produce speech input into the device. So the ability to talk to your mobile phone and get LaTeX appearing in your document might be very helpful. So this could be an example where advances for accessibility for disabled users are advances for everyone, and getting away from the idea that we have a big file and we turn it into a big document, and rather think we have these small independent pieces that come together, and they might be authored independently by a lot of people, and then they come together. So it's perhaps a slightly different model of things. And what we really want to do is author the source document, and the typeset output is a way of checking the source document and a way of seeing what we're doing better. Oh, any more comments before we move on?
Tim, I appreciate. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say. Sorry,
go.
Let me just react to one thing that Tim said. So,
sorry, Jim, you're frozen.
My internet connection is bad. Why doesn't somebody else go ahead for the moment?
I just wanted to say that is LaTeX that computationally heavy? As a hobby, I ran it on a Raspberry Pi. It works. It's, I mean, just for the fun of it, it worked fine. I mean, you set up a Linux system, you set up Emacs, it works fine. I mean, it's not that computationally heavy for computers for the last few years.
No, the constraint on certainly on Apple devices, there are some very serious blockages on what's allowed in the App Store in terms of the functionality. You have to squash too much into one bit of code. And for someone like me, who, given what I was saying in my introduction about my job, I don't use Google, I don't use Android devices for security reasons. So there are physical constraints about how it's implemented on Apple devices. It's not a horsepower problem. I agree with you. I've had it running on a Raspberry Pi. It works a treat. And the Raspberry Pi 4, I mean, it's almost like having a 5 years ago laptop. So there's no issue in terms of sheer horsepower. But Jonathan's earlier point about the ability now, the smart gadgets to take dictation and feed in rather than to use the dreadful, awful micro little keyboards is certainly something that's quite interesting.
Yeah, 2 points. One is the issue in my mind is not so much the computational power of modern devices, but when you're talking to a server, there's always latency. And one of my goals is to have essentially instantaneous rendering of what you're typing. And that's why I do it in the client. And also, I must say, I just enjoy writing parsers and compilers. So I'm interested in this project. But the other point is I found it very interesting what Tim mentioned, and it's inspired me to, I think I will knock off, which I can do rather quickly, sort of a simple notepad version of what I've been doing that will not need a network connection at all. One thing I'll have to do is to, when I construct it, instead of accessing MathJax or Katek over the web, it will be incorporated into the app so that you can work entirely connection-free. So I think there's a good use case for that. And then the idea is that you could type away and then later you could transfer to another device if you wish.
That sounds very neat.
Oh, for the audio.